I, I just adored this novel, so I'm really glad we're getting a chance to talk about it again. It's so much fun. Jasmin came to a book club that I ran at Book Passage too, and that's something that we're going to talk about today. Thank you, Linda, for saying it was my idea. It really wasn't. It was your idea. But what we're doing at Book Passage, excuse me, is that we're inviting book clubs to come into the store to spend time either doing the book club meeting in the store or on the patio, depending on the weather and what's going on in the world. And what we're doing is I help facilitate them if the book club wants, and if the book club's not interested, that's fine too. But what we do then is invite the book club to come into the store together. And what we do is we do a sort of live book talk. So we take the club around the store and chat about all the new novels. Jasmin did that once for us. It was really fun. She opened up a lot of people's eyes to some things that they hadn't heard about, and they talked about subsequently. So, and they really love some of your picks, Jasmin. And that's one of the things that we love doing, is introducing people to new books, new ideas. The only thing that we ask of people is that they shop and buy something. It doesn't matter what they buy. We just ask them to buy something in exchange for the time that we spend with you. So that's one thing. And I just also wanted to say that this Christmas season is way different than last Christmas season. This year we're plagued with supply chain problems and printing problems and paper problems. But thanks to Elaine, who owns a store, and to our head buyer, Louisa, we have an amazing selection, better than almost anybody else right now, of all the really great new stuff. And our little Santa's elves have been making the store beautiful and doing everything we can so that you can come in and have a really nice and relaxed shopping experience. And it's such an important time of year for all bookstores right now. And Linda can attest to this. We make a significant amount of our annual income in this 3-week period before Christmas. And it's one of the ways that Book Passage can stay in business, is to have the kind of support that all of you give us. So big thanks to you. Now, if any of you want to join our book club idea, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. I will put my email address in the chat section of this video. And please encourage you to just email anytime you want about anything you want, and any way I can help you, I would love to. In this, we're going to try and expand our book club concept and really create new book clubs and do book club teas and with some of the best reps from Penguin Random House, for example, HarperCollins, all of the houses. They love talking with customers, and they rarely get a chance to do so. I'm not going to take up any more time, because really the star of the show tonight is Linda and Jasmin. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Deirdre. Actually, the star is Jasmin, but it's really about keeping bookstores open and making sure that the real brick and mortar bookstores, to me, that's a bookstore, get the customers in, and that we buy books from them as much as possible. And although we're Zooming, we feel we're definitely a lot more in touch with a bookstore that has walls and books inside it. So we're really, thank you so much for this, for the time, Deirdre, and you're always so helpful. Many, many thanks. Okay, so folks, we're going to be talking about Jasmin's book, which, as you know, I've given it to a number of people, which, as you know, is available at Book Passage, and it's a great Christmas gift. And I was talking about the sort of prescience that Jasmin Darznik has in her book, The Bohemians, which is, I still have a copy here. It's one of my favorites. And I was talking to her about a couple things that, before we opened up to everybody, a couple of things that I thought were super, super important in her book. And one of them is the character Caroline, who is the Chinese American girl and helper or assistant for Dorothea. Dorothea is a woman who's trying to make her way in the world as an artist at a difficult time. And then also the flu epidemic that was going. These are all these strings of really, really important things that sort of tie in. So I'm going to ask her to talk a little bit about her book, which has had this amazing response from, I guess, all over the world. And those things, first of all, and then open it up to questions. We have a little over an hour, so plenty of time for questions and chat. What I'm going to ask everybody to do is when you're not talking is to mute. And if you have a question, you could type it into the chat, and I will make sure that we address it, that you get to talk your question at some point. So for right now, I'm going to turn it over to the amazing and very entertaining on the page, Jasmin Darznik.
Oh my gosh. So you are all a sight for sore eyes. I wish I could just, reach into the screen and hug you all. I'm seeing Anne, my beloved friends, Joanna. I mean, all of you are just so wonderful to be here. My friend Becky Faust is in the room, and Bohemians is dedicated to her. So very special that she's here. And this is actually, by way, Linda did not mention, and some of you know, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Becky and I met in Linda's workshop many years ago, 15 years ago, I think now. Is that right, Becky? Something like that, a long, long time ago. So I think, Linda she's the reason I write. If you enjoyed anything, if you've read Bohemians or anything I've written, it would not exist without her. She is also the one who led me to Becky, who's, she's been with me through every book. And like I say, Bohemians is dedicated to her. So Linda and we go back to the beginning, my beginning anyway, that room at Book Passage. And I can never say enough how grateful I am to Linda for her encouragement. You all know her big soul, the incredible way that she nurtures so many. I mean, now they are legion. We are legion, your followers, Linda. I would not have found my voice in this world without her. So I had to say
I don't know about that.
It's true.
I think you would have found you. I think you have a very big voice, and even if you didn't find it, it would have found you.
Yeah, I disagree, but we won't belabor it.
Okay. All right.
In any case, it's just always a delight to connect with Linda. So Bohemians, if you haven't read it, just very, very briefly, Dorothea Lange is the main character. Dorothea Lange is the great iconic photographer. She produced that photograph, My Grandmother, which even if people don't know who it is, who took that picture, they know that image. It's probably one of the most famous images ever made. So the story, though, is about Dorothea Lange when she's young, and she's just come to the city. She's 23 when she comes over from New Jersey, and true story, she gets robbed the very first day that she comes to San Francisco. So here she is, it's 1918. She does know a soul. She didn't plan on staying. She was just kind of passing through San Francisco. All of a sudden she has no money at all. And it is this accident in history that launches her and also launches the novel. So I got really excited about the book as I sort of, started to do the research around Lange. I got so excited about this mention of a Chinese American assistant. So that's who Linda's talking about. It's the story of the friendship between kind of, an unlikely friendship between this young Dorothea Lange and her Chinese American assistant. They set up a studio at 540 Sutter Street, and adventures ensue. Linda was mentioning earlier how she asked me, when did you start writing the book? And she was asking because I think, Linda, you were kind of weirded out maybe by some of the parallels. So there's the pandemic, there's also a really appalling, heinous politician out on the loose, and he was based on a real character, James Phelan. I changed the name in the novel. There's also, at that time, San Francisco was a segregated city, so there's virulent anti-Asian sentiment, legislation in the air. There were a lot of parallels. One of the main ones also is a theme that I seem to come back a lot to is the discrimination and violence against women. So that unfortunately has never not been happening. But as I was writing the book, it's true, sometimes I myself would be a little bit, it could be strange sometimes to find myself writing and seeing these echoes around me as I was writing. Linda, do you want to pop in and ask me questions? I mean, I don't want to keep just, oh, you got to unmute yourself though.
I do have other questions for you. A lot of the famous photographers popped in and famous artists. There were a lot of cameos in the book.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you chose who you wanted to who you wanted to appear in the book. Obviously, her husband had to appear, and he was a very, very interesting character, I thought. Maynard, and kind of an annoying character as well. I don't know if he was really like that. Did you tweak the personalities of these characters who popped in? Did you pick them because he didn't really pop in, he was there? Did you select them because they were going to be meaningful to the story, some of these cameos? How did you decide who you were going to use in the book?
Well, there was really no dearth of characters in San Francisco in the 20s. It seemed like the difficulty was really in narrowing it down. It seemed like everywhere you looked in San Francisco, there was some flamboyant, outrageous personality. Maynard Dixon is the one who attaches himself. I mean, in her life and in the novel, he's the one who gives her entree into this bohemian scene. I do keep things true to the essence of what they were historically, biographically. So I would never make him, if he was an ungenerous person, I wouldn't make him generous. If he was a faithful husband, I wouldn't make him unfaithful. So much of what you see is extracted from biographies and other accounts of Lange, interviews that she did, other accounts that I was able to access. What I do is I'll take something that's maybe mentioned in passing or briefly in a biography. For example, in the novel, Dorothea becomes a stepmother to Maynard Dixon's 12, 13-year-old daughter. And in the biography, there's mention of how difficult that relationship is. Here are these two newlyweds, and then there's this 13-year-old daughter who's been neglected in lots of ways. And then what I do is I imagine scenes. So I put you there in a way where you feel like you're in the moment. What might occupy just a paragraph in a biography might become a whole chapter, right? And I'm really dramatizing what you might otherwise just get very, very briefly in a historical account. And then the other people were, I was so fortunate. The women who surrounded Dorothea Lange were phenomenally interesting. Dorothea Lange, when she comes to San Francisco, she falls in with this community of women artists. It was difficult. Any of these women deserves a novel. I really feel like Imogen Cunningham could have a novel. Consuelo Kanaga could have a novel.
Mm-hmm.
They are really such really renegades at the time, right? In some ways, they were braver than Dorothea Lange at that time, at least. And she was really awestruck by the presence of these women in San Francisco. So I followed the true lines of history, and I, in this case, I was just very fortunate that there were so many interesting characters I could bring in. I think with Consuelo, if you've read the novel and it was a little bit of a surprise, but I realized maybe halfway through the book, having a journalist was really useful in a novel, because you could have somebody who's prowling around and sleuthing about, and so sometimes I'd start out with a character and I wouldn't know necessarily how useful they could be or how interesting they would eventually become, but I worked on hunches and was fortunate.
Well, what I really liked in this work, which you used such a broader lens and had so many more characters. In Song of a Captive Bird, it was very much in, because of the situation and her being a poet and everything too, we were very much in the main character's mind a lot of the time and from her point of view. But in this one, it was a lot more cinematic, and that was really exciting to see, just to see all of San Francisco, it must have been really fun to pick and choose. One of the things I really loved seeing, and in addition to all the wonderful characters, was Monkey Block.
Yeah.
Is that was a real place?
It was a real place. And I think everything really started with Monkey Block. So I was teaching at USF and I'd written these 2 books about Iran and I was thinking, what should I do now? I had this vague notion I'd write about San Francisco. And then I encountered in a student's work, she was writing about this place called Monkey Block. I'd never heard about it. I thought, I mean, it was such a strange name. And then I first learned about its history. So Monkey Block was a real place. It was called Montgomery Block. It stood where the Transamerica Pyramid is now. So I think all of you know, are quite intimate with the city. But it was once a 4-story. It didn't start out as an artist colony. It was when it kind of fell into disrepair, the artists found the rents were very cheap and it became a very hospitable place for artists, and Maynard Dixon was one of them. But for about 100 years, this building had stood right there where we now have the Transamerica building, and some 800 writers and artists and journalists had made their homes in this place.
So I'm looking. Oh, so here's a question. How much historical info? Whose question is this? I wish I could tell. Deirdre's. Okay, I see it here, Deirdre. How much historical info was available to you about the Chinese assistant Caroline?
Very little. She was the least accessible to me as far as the source material. So these other women haven't necessarily been, they have not been the subject of many biographies, but absolutely this Chinese American assistant was often not even named in accounts of Lange's life. So there was no name even to go with. But there was one really important clue, which was that they called her the mission girl, or there was reference to the fact that she had grown up in a mission. And that became such an important clue to where she might have come from in San Francisco at that time. So we're talking about early 1900s. There was a mission home that stood at 920 Sacramento Street. And I was able to read accounts of that place and also just accounts more broadly about sex trafficking in the city. At that time, it was a flourishing industry. This house at 920 Sacramento Street was a house of refuge for many hundreds of women. So that was a very, I think, critical. I don't know how much, I think a lot of Caroline comes through knowing that she would have been, she was someone whose life intersected in some way with the sex trafficking and the mission home that was then giving refuge to these women.
I'm going to let people, I'm just going to mention people and then you can ask your own questions. Please unmute and then ask your own question. I think Ann Sigmund, Anne, you had a question, right, that you wanted to ask?
I have a question.
Oh,
Sandra?
all right.
Yes, I have a question. Thanks. I tried to put it in the chat, but I'm not sure I worked it
Okay,
properly.
Sandra.
But yeah, so I was wondering, since this was based on a real person's life, did you have to get permission from her estate or anyone else who sort of controls her personal information to write a novel about her?
And you mean Dorothea Lange?
Yes.
Yeah. So once someone is dead, you can write anything, especially for a well-known figure. The rules are different for famous people. The rules are really different for famous dead people. No one ever took me to task over anything in the book. I did not ask for permission. The book got vetted by an attorney. So, they're certainly very careful. But even James Phelan, it's very easy to tell who I'm talking about, even though I give him a pseudonym in the novel. Maybe someday I'll hear from one of the Phelan heirs. I'll get a sense of their opinion. But as far as the publisher was concerned, I had free reign, carte blanche.
I learned a lot about Phelan. I mean, that was really interesting. I mean, I never knew what a bad person he was until I read your book. There's an award that's given.
I know. I won that award.
I know. So
It's a literary
yes,
award. Becky knows it was one of the early ones I won. You probably pointed me to it. So
all
is
the
that
better for
cool?
you
I
to
don't know.
expose it.
Yeah, but
Becky had a question.
yeah.
Becky, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have two questions. The first is, can you tell us, we're curious about the title. Like, how did you settle on that title? What other titles were you considering?
Uh-huh.
I think I know the answer, but
Do you know some of this you might remember better than I do? So Becky, as I was writing the book, we would get together and go on our walks around Phoenix Lake, and she she was such a wonderful listener. You know, I ran a lot of awful plot lines by her, not a lot of awful titles, I
I
think.
like the murder mystery one.
I know. So I'm just gonna, since you've read the book, originally there was the main, mystery or action in the book was going to be there were going to be murders in Chinatown, and I remember Becky just saying, I don't think so. So you can thank Becky that the plot went in a direction that was more organic to the story, just briefly. And that is what a good friend can do, is they can point out where you're going astray, and you should,
Especially if that friend is a wonderful writer as
writer.
well, which
Oh,
Becky
Recommend it
is.
to everyone.
but back to the question about the
Question.
title.
Okay. It was originally Bohemians of Telegraph Hill. I've struggled with titles in the past, but this one was Bohemians of Telegraph Hill for a very, very long time. I wanted that immediate association with San Francisco, but when it came to the late stages, when it was about to go to press, the decision by the publisher was that it would be more, I guess, more welcoming if it were just Bohemians. It would feel less specific in a good way, in a way that felt more inviting to a broader readership. So that's what happened, and I tend to go with, I defer to that kind of advice. The publisher knows its market much better than I do. So that was the title, Bohemians of Telegraph Hill.
And then the other question I had was, so we were not in a pandemic when you were writing the book.
Right.
And since the book was written, you have lived through an actual pandemic.
Yeah.
And are there things you would do differently or render differently about the Spanish flu in the book, had you lived through the pandemic before you wrote it?
Yeah. So Linda asked when did you start writing this, essentially? And I started writing before the pandemic. I did not expect the pandemic to be a big part of the novel. And Rebecca and Becky, to answer your question, I think if I had lived through more of the pandemic, it might have actually become a pandemic novel. And I'm glad it didn't, because I think that could have dated it. So you feel the relevance, you feel the echoes of history, but I'm glad there wasn't more time for me to sit on that and make it, I don't know. I mean, I think it maybe it would have been interesting, but it could have limited the story. It could have given it a little bit. You would feel the strain of me trying to make it topical, I think, and that can just kind of not work.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It really could have taken over the whole story.
Yeah. But I was able to insert certain things. So I was working against the clock furiously, and I was able to I did more research, and I was able to bring in, let's say, there were all kinds of conspiracy theories about where the Spanish flu came from. I mean, all of that was so eerily like what was happening. In 1918, the rumors were that the Germans had put it into Bayer aspirin pills, and that the flu was, entered into America. The Germans had introduced it in that way. And at that same time, we were hearing about the China flu and all kinds of conspiracy theories. So I was able to make these connections, but I think in the end, it was better that I didn't have enough time to make it a much, much, much more prominent part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Inga has her hand up. She's had her hand up for some time.
Oh, it's okay.
And I just thought it was a little hand. But now we see that she's had her. Inga, I think you have a question.
I do. I really enjoyed the book so much, and I've been racing through it this week to finish it before tonight. So I was really appreciated the historical notes at the end also, because I was very curious, as I think others might be, about about Caroline, and so so I understand there wasn't a lot of background about her. But did you, how, can you, I'm interested in the process, the creative process of what you went through. For one thing, when I write, I'm very literal. So, I mean, just the thought of writing a novel kind of terrifies me. So the fact that you set this within the context of so much history and so many well-known characters seems very daunting. But for Caroline in particular, did you have some composite examples from history that you used to create her persona, or what kind of research did you do to help create that figure? And I so much appreciate how much the book is focused on women, multiple women, and especially that part of San Francisco's history.
Yeah. So I decided, one of the things I decided is to make Caroline mixed race. And that was, I don't think, sometimes I think, was it a safer choice? Maybe it would have been safer. I did not feel entirely comfortable writing a Chinese woman character at this time in history. So I am Middle Eastern, I'm an immigrant. There's a lot in Caroline that that comes from my life, or that is inspired by certain things in my own family story. But writing her as 100, I felt it wasn't really proper. And so I made her mixed race, which is closer actually to my own experience. I was born in Iran. My mother's Iranian and my father's European. So I knew something about what that was like. But even if I understood, I'm living 100 years later. So you're absolutely right. It was very useful to have some, you said composite, or what did I draw from? So I found that there were two sisters, both of them writers, who were half Chinese, and one of them became she's sort of thought of as the grandmother of Chinese American literature, and the other one passed as Japanese. And these two women left, both of them wrote memoirs, and those were very useful to me in trying to piece together the mindset, what would their experiences have been like. It was such a valuable resource to me, finding these two women who thankfully they'd been writers, so they left a record.
I was wondering if you found diaries, or like how you just found that information. Yeah, that's great.
Biographies, and so I was able to draw a lot of inspiration from those two, and a lot of it is imagined. I wish I had a formula, but I do think there's a heavy dose of imagination in here. So you can do a lot of research, and I do a lot of research, but in the end, the character won't come alive without imagining, right? And so at a certain point, I just had to trust that I had learned what I could, and that I could draw on my empathetic capacities to complete the portrait.
Thank you.
We have another really wonderful journalist, poet, novelist with us here, and she has a question for you. And that's Joanna Baker. Joanna, you had a question for Jasmin? Is she here? Joanna?
I'm unmuting, I hope. Did that work?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, thank
it
you.
did.
Well, you've touched on some of my question, but I basically, I didn't know when I started out about, that much of Caroline's portrait was imagined and was created, which was a real testament to you, because she's such a compelling character. But my question was, in your other works, when I've been transported to some other culture, starting with the good daughter. You created such a wonderful world, Iranian world for me to understand, which is not something I know personally at all. And I felt completely drawn into that in your books that have been set there. And I do know something about Chinatown and that aspect of San Francisco's history because I've been fascinated by it for decades, and I've written about it and done journalism there and other things. And it was your capturing it seemed so very authentic to me, and I wondered if, you just said now you've drawn on some of your own experience as an immigrant and outsider and so on to create that, and I know you've done a lot of research, but I just wondered if that came easily to you. Because it really does. It was just being transported into that world that did seem familiar to me and very right on. So was that a challenge, or did it just flow from the experience of your life and then the research you've done?
It takes a long time for it to look the way that it looks when you see it. It doesn't look like that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like that until I really need to fall in love with the characters is what has to happen. And then through the characters, I can begin to see their world and make you feel part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of like, I think about, there's that wonderful, it's John Gardner has the phrase about fiction, you're seeking to create a continuous and vivid dream. I think I'm beginning, and I think to get there, to get a reader there, you have to be in a dream state yourself. So it takes a long time, but eventually, usually with the threat of the deadline hanging over me, I become so enmeshed in this world. It's more real to me, ask people around me. I am not really here. I'm some other place. And I live kind of, in this dream state for a while. So that's not I don't know if that's a very useful answer, but it's a matter of falling in love. It's really kind of surrendering yourself to the story, which takes on a life of its own. There's so much in Bohemians that I feel like I was there to record it and to write it, but so much about that novel revealed itself to me and surprised me as I was writing it. So being really present, I suppose, really surrendering to it. I learned, I had a wonderful teacher too. This is a little bit more of a helpful or, just a more practical aspect of it. Linda taught us, I remember from workshops, is the importance of sensory detail. So that feeling you have of immersion, I think, flows a lot from the sensory details. Maybe it's being an immigrant. I can't tell you authoritatively if this is true, but I'm very sensitive to places, to any change. I'm always very observant. I think it has to do with survival. When you're an immigrant, you just register. I tend to just be extremely sensitive to my environment, all aspects of it, people, but also the landscape, how it looks. It's something I think immigration has at least fortified in me, if not inspired entirely. Yeah. So those sensory details, letting myself really fully imagine the world through my senses, through this preoccupation I have with place. That's also, I think, part of, if I knew entirely, Joanna, I would keep doing this like every time. I would figure out how it's done. But I really do think a lot of it is love. I really, really do think like that each book has been so different, and in order for it to come alive, I have had to love the characters very deeply.
Thank you. Great answer.
So I have a question for you, Jasmin. I think that this book, I felt like, I know you probably really absorb the character. You have to live and be with the characters in order to write the book. And I was wondering about the reciprocity. You put some things onto the page that you think have to do with the character. Do they write a story on you? I noticed the whole fashion thing with you all of a sudden exploded after the Bohemians.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what the influences of doing all that research in that era were on you and on your life.
Oh, that's so fun. So the way what I get and the way it imprints itself on me too. I mean, I think it starts with what I'm interested in or curious about, or I'm a dressmaker's granddaughter. I've always really, I don't know, it's just always been something I love and adore, is the story that clothes tell. And by making Caroline a seamstress, first of all, I mean, I think historically that would have been one of the few professions she could have practiced. But then also it became a way really of expressing so much about who she was, what she wanted, what was denied her, all those things I could tell through the clothing. And I think with every book you get a chance to live at least maybe a few different lives, So I didn't know anything about photography. I learned a lot about photography. I didn't know that, I knew some about fashion, but I didn't know that much about fashion, and so now, going forward, that is part of me now. I am able to look at what's ahead of me now with the gifts that these characters gave me. The next, I'm writing about an actress now. I don't know anything about actress, but I'm learning as I go. And for somebody who's really, I really am very shy and so bookish, and very, very much prefer to be alone. It's so great to get to see the world through these women who, they're all much more daring and out there, right? Or I just think of them as they're wonderful company. To me, all of my heroines have been just great company for me.
You also make them great company for us and wonderful role models in a lot of ways. I mean, all of your characters have been extraordinary role models, I think, for women of every age, and probably a lot of men as well. But especially since they're all very daring, and they're up against a lot of obstacles, which many of us feel that we are constantly. And it's wonderful to see somebody. They don't always win against those obstacles. I think they're very, very realistic, but it's wonderful to see somebody fight the fight, which is, I think, really a very exciting part of it. And you wanted to say something earlier, and I don't know if you had your chance to say what you wanted to say.
Well, I think it kind of goes to what Jasmine was talking about. I saw Bohemian area San Francisco as a great character in the book. I was fascinated with learning about what it was like, having lived in San Francisco, not all my life, but, for 40 years. But I didn't know much about that particular era. And I just loved it. And I would also have to say, I loved what you've done on your promotions and your Facebook to, we keep learning more and more about it. And I really saw the city of that day as a character in the book. It really came alive for me, and it really gelled with what I know about San Francisco. I mean, it really seemed real to me. I wanted to go back there for a visit.
I love that. I love that so much. I having written about Iran, I think I had to, in some ways, a lot more freedom when I was writing about Iran, because I could be making a lot up and you wouldn't know. Or just a very few people might know. But writing about San Francisco, I knew I'd be writing for, in many cases, people who loved the city and knew its history, and how wonderful to show. I have many people will tell me, I never knew there was a monkey block. I didn't know Dorothea Lange, was a flapper in San Francisco in the 1920s. So how fun. And I was learning it, I think really, Anne, when I'm sharing things on Instagram, or I do it because I think I just really love to learn. I love to learn. And a lot of what you see is just a a sort of look at what I found. So the novel is sort of look at what I found. I found this whole world, and then the little stories are a continuation of this just glee of discovery and I think history for a lot of us, we might be interested in it, but a story makes it so much more enticing, doesn't it? I mean, just,
Right, it does.
So I love the research part of it. And I think of myself almost like a conduit. I'm somebody who, I think I've got a good sense for like what's a good story. And I am willing to go hunting in the archives for it for a long, long time. But what I really love is that final gesture of look what I made, look what I found for you. It just delights me to learn.
So I have another question, Jasmin. A lot of the people here are travel writers as well. Some of the people that are have joined us for this book chat and for this book club, as am I. And I remember you once telling me how much you missed Iran and that you loved recreating the sense of Iran in your book, Song of a Captive Bird. In one of your talks, you were talking about that. And I just want to say that with San Francisco, I have now this longing for the San Francisco that I don't want this San Francisco. I always want to go back to the old. I have this longing for a San Francisco that I never lived in. I feel like I was there and I want to go back. So what are the tools, what are the things that you do to create that essence that you leave on the page that makes us feel like we're there? Maybe you could talk a little bit about craft now and some of the things that you've done to make it so real. I mean, do you walk the streets and figure out what street is where? What do you do to immerse yourself in a way that it comes out on the page in that way?
So again, I am very much a homebody, and I think the way I explore the world is through books. So that's where I start, really. I have to say I do start by reading a lot about these places and writing about San Francisco. I could go to the San Francisco Public Library. They have a devoted floor to San Francisco history. So that was terrific. Eventually, I got out of my house and went to the library. And then, I think for each scene, I'm often thinking what part of the city would accentuate the dramatic content of that scene, right? So when I have, let's see, Dory and Caroline they're walking on Fillmore Street, and they're going to the dance lessons, and a lot of that scene, well, they wind up getting accosted by these, essentially white nationalists, we'd call them now, these guys. But Fillmore was this incredibly diverse neighborhood, and so I thought that there would be something very interesting in peeling back history, taking you back to a time when Fillmore had Jewish delis and Swedish bakeries, and just such an incredible collision of cultures. But then you would then encounter this contingent that hated that saw that as despicable, and saw Caroline as the embodiment of this kind of mixture, right? So thinking about places, particular places in the city, and I think you got to be a little bit careful, because the urge is to put everything in there, just like do this kind of tour of the city and put everything in there. But I think when it works well is where you're thinking about how the setting can evoke something about the story, or accentuate the story that you're telling. I went to the library, and then I did eventually go to North Beach, and that was very instructive, because the first thing you notice when you go to North Beach, or you're in Chinatown, is how close it all is, right? This is not New York, where things are, it's across the street, just across from Columbus, right? But somehow these worlds in San Francisco were so discrete, and as a matter of law, the Chinese wouldn't even, venture across Columbus. So going into the city at a certain point and just really seeing how proximate these places were was very powerful and instructive to me. does that help a little bit or show a little bit of how I do it?
That does, and now I want to go on a tour that is just
I know.
just with the places in your book where you go from one place to another, because Chinatown and North Beach really do, they kind of,
Just
they
right
do more than intersect. They join it in different places, and it's true. You could just walk up Kearney, I guess it is, or one of the Grand Avenue, and you're in. You move from Chinatown to North Beach, so it's amazing that you can do a lot of that at your desk and not be constantly walking around with a map and charting everything out. But it's a little like scouting for a movie, I guess. So that does give me an idea of that. I think John Fetto has a question. John, did you want to ask your question?
Let me put it in the chat.
Basically, having followed your career for these years, I noticed how different this book launch is from the other two. You came out in the middle of a plague, basically.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's amazing and spectacular. But can you tell me some of the things you learned and any advice to other writers who are aspiring to break through?
To write, John, you mean advice for writing through a pandemic, or just keeping on going no matter what?
No, I get the part of it. Being locked in your room is helpful during a plague, but I'm talking about when you actually have to come out and promote the book and sell the book. I mean, on the first book, you were national television.
Yeah.
Other things.
Yeah.
This one I'll bet was harder. I don't know why I would say that, but a lot of businesses are struggling, including publishing.
Yeah.
And so you're one of these writers who, despite all that, is still putting books out there that are going through. You must have learned something about this experience that you could share.
Yeah, you got to stay nimble and be able to, pivot real quick. I never thought the pandemic would still be with us. There was a year to go when I was starting to think about promotion and all the places I wanted to go and all the bookstores I wanted to visit, including my beloved Book Passage. And I thought for sure everything would be back to normal by then. And it wasn't, and it wasn't, and it wasn't. And so all of the plans I had laid for myself and Bohemians were scrapped. I had to, learn. It was a very steep learning curve about doing online events. And in some cases, seeing how it was actually terrific. Sometimes I could reach people that I would never have seen in real life. I could be at a writers' conference in Rhode Island talking with my conversation partners were in Prague. These kind of extraordinary meeting of worlds could happen over Zoom that would never have happened. But John, what I did is I had to really adjust my expectations. And there was a time, since you're so one, I know you've watched me and you've been there through all this all along, but there was a certain point I went on Facebook and I just said, if you have a book group, I'll be there, and Jasmine of 10 years ago, maybe, wouldn't have thought she, I don't know, like I would have thought maybe, is that too brash, or is it just like, I shouldn't have to do that or what, but I did it, and then it it humbles you in some ways, but then it also shows you some those book group conversations, Deirdre, seriously, they're what kept me going. If I was not able to, fire up my Zoom a couple times a week, I think I would have been in utter despair, not having any. And it's also just what's happened to publishing in the last 10 years. So from the time I published Good Daughter to now, when I published Good Daughter, I had maybe 12 NPR interviews. It was just, it seemed like I was always doing an interview of that kind, or I had television. All of that is gone, or at least I haven't seen it since, and I don't think that my experience is unique in that. So somehow you need to, swallow your pride, do what you can. And then now I think I need to go back, kind of into my, into my cave again and make something, because I cannot, I don't feel that I want to necessarily, I don't want to be promoting this book for the next 10 years, you know. I love and adore it and I want it to reach lots of readers, but I feel myself needing to pull away and to let something new come through.
Can I just interject here from the perspective of the store? You know, Jasmin, you have been dealing with promoting the book on a, you know, almost individual by individual basis. And I know that, you know, Book Passage loves you and you love Book Passage, and we've sold out on this book 3 or 4 times already, and, you know, had to get new copies and had to wait till they reprinted it. And it's been, you know, a completely huge success in our store. And I know it's true elsewhere too. I've asked you to be in other book groups. You know, you've been amazing that way. And for an introvert, you've been incredible, both in person and on Zoom. But, and you have said this before about needing to move on to your new work rather than staying in the process of constantly talking about Bohemians. When your paperback comes out, I'm really hoping that that period of time will allow you to have some kind of a real in-person book launch.
Yeah.
If nowhere else, certainly at Book Passage, because so many of the people that have bought the book and have such strong feelings about it. I mean, sometimes we're selling the book in the store, saying to somebody, oh, this is a book you should buy in person.
Yeah.
Another customer will come right up and say, oh, I read that book. It's fantastic. You'll love it. You know, set in San Francisco, all the stuff we've talked about tonight. So I'm afraid you're going to have to, you know, move forward.
Okay.
Come back together and sort of relive the book again, yet again.
I won't dispute it. You know what, Deirdre, let's say this. I remember when Song of a Captive Bird came out, I read maybe 2 pages from Bohemians, and Bohemians was just in my computer. It was just a draft at that point, but it was so wonderful to share it with a crowd. So let's say this, if, fingers crossed, we have an in-person event for the paperback, I will read you a page or 2 from the novel I'm working on right now.
Woo,
That's exciting.
that is.
Yeah, because
I
it is
think people will love that.
it's magic to see people in person, you know. All of this is wonderful, but my gosh, you know, yeah, I will be there.
Okay.
Wonderful.
We'll be there with you.
She did it. She extracted a promise from you. She's always on her game. She always knows what to do. Well, we have about 5 minutes more. Does anybody else have a question before we sign out here? Anybody else have anything that they want to say? Oh, I see a hand. Laura Dunn has to say something. Yes.
It's really more of a, I don't dare ask anything. I want to comment about how incredibly helpful it is, Jasmin, to others. I am this little worm among the people here, but I know Lori and I share this fascination with place and history, as you do, and that being able to immerse yourself in your characters is something that, you know, fall in love with them, is that I've been able to do because of genealogy and learning things about the incredible variety of ancestors that I have. And I'm about to write about Priscilla Mullins, who became Priscilla Mullins Alden on the Mayflower. And channeling her, you said you become a conduit. It's like I'm already channeling her. I can feel it. And using my own ancestry to do it. You've channeled and been a conduit for Iranian ancestry, and been able to transfer it to Chinese mixed. And I'm just so grateful to hear you talk about all that.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that is so wonderful. And, you know, I think we all have these stories that must come through us. Linda has one of her first exercises. Do you remember, Becky? I'm looking to Becky for helping me remember, but I remember, Linda, a long time ago when I was in your writing workshop, you said, what are the 5 stories that you have to tell before you die? Something to that effect. Like you really made us dig deep and think about what are the stories that you have to tell. Yeah. Like that you feel, maybe you don't even remember this. Maybe I'm making it up, but I feel like you're the one who you taught me, don't go for the low hanging fruit, dig deep in yourself and tell the story that only you can tell the story you must tell. And Laura, I say this is nothing I've ever done has sounded like a good idea to anybody. But I think that it is your love and that feeling of devotion to the subject, to the people, that transforms the story and can make it miraculous. So I love that you're writing your ancestors' story and you're feeling the presence of them move through you, and may we all have the great fortune of continuing to tell our stories.
Well said, Jasmine, and well executed on the page. You've definitely made your point on the page in all of your books. They're wonderful. We can't wait for the next one.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we have this one in hardcover coming out soon, I'm sure, in paperback, but not soon enough for Christmas. So buy it in hardcover. And as Deirdre told everybody, it's available at Book Passage. So make sure that you get it there. We're going to close here. I'm just going to say thank you very, very much, Jasmine.
I just see Diane LeBeau wanting to say or ask.
Oh, did Diane have something she wanted to say?
Sorry.
Am I unmuted now?
Now you are, Diane.
Okay. Yeah, no, Jasmine, I love your writing so much. I loved all your books. I work with Afghan women, so I'm kind of Middle Eastern in my approach. I finished my travel memoir, which is out, and I'm kind of stuck. I know Linda would say, you're not stuck, but I need to move on with a new project, and I having trouble, even in spite of my long life and a lot of adventures, finding something that really juices me up and wants me to move ahead. So any advice on how to get unstuck and move to, I don't want to be a Virginia Woolf. I want to get the rocks out of my pocket and get on with a new project. So I admire you so much and love you. So any advice?
So I've committed to writing the next book before Bohemians came out. When Song of a Captive Bird, came out, I had already committed to writing Bohemians. And I do this to myself. I don't know what it would mean, what the version of this, Diane, is, but I think having some kind of external goal, pressure, deadline, for me, it's always been miraculous. If I did not have those deadlines, I would be writing myself into the woods for 10, 20, maybe a lifetime. You wouldn't see me. I would never come out.
I understand.
Yeah. And so the deadlines, I have to get really excited about reading, so that I tend to get stuck when I can't find good books to read. So I think that's important work in your preparation is feeling, finding those books that just excite you and feel like these are my comrades. I'm going into this next adventure. Who are what company, who's to my left and my right? I have a book, Diane, that I read before every project. I reread Tipping the Velvet, and I look at it because it's on my shelf. It's always on my shelf. I read Tipping the Velvet, which isn't a perfect book, but for me, it is the company in which I want to find myself. And so every time I start a project, I sit with that, I reread it, and I really think deeply about how it's doing what it does, and what this time around I can steal from it or learn from it.
Take it out. Thank you.
Yeah. So, getting inspired by your reading, that could be really helpful. And then other than that, and I know you all have to go, but I think now I don't know when you do what, but I think you either need to back away from the project or you need to go deeper into it. So I think either you just have to cut yourself some slack and say, okay, it's okay that I can't write now for whatever reason. Or maybe it's time to rent a motel room and spend, 3 days locked up, just you and your manuscript. The trick is, I don't know which one works at what juncture. Maybe you got to try both.
Thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad you got your question in. And thank you, Laura, for calling my attention to Diane's question. Are there any more questions, folks? Raise your hands if there are. Okay. Because I just want to thank Jasmin for being so gracious and so wonderful, and for participating. Our next, we're going to continue this Left Coast Writers Book Club, I think, because Jasmin made it so much fun. I think we'll do it again. If it had been a disaster, it might have just kamikazed, but it's going to go on. So our next book that we're going to be discussing is nonfiction, and it shall be revealed. It's a secret right now, but it shall be revealed to you in our messages via Left Coast Writers and etc. So thank you all for joining us. Jasmin, thank you so much. And you want any last words for people before we close? Okay, that's it. Everybody, thank you, Jasmin. Thank you all for joining us. It was a great first book club.
Thank you, darling Linda. Love
Thank
you
you,
all.
honey.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Becky. Bye, Joanna. Bye, Karina. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you all for coming.
So great to see everybody.
See you later.
Bye,
Bye,
Karina.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Karina.
Okay.
Bye.
We'll see you all on the other side. Bye.